It's a few lines, so yeah.
Few lines. Says the Mishnah on Daf Chav Daled Amabet, Elohein Hapsulin. These are the people who are apostle. Obviously, we're talking about how you choose witnesses and judges. This is for both, but mainly witnesses. And it's gonna help. Obviously, the Gemara is gonna go on for a couple of days about this, but the basic principle is that someone who's over a major avera, let's say, whatever major means, is puzzle for testimony and for a dayan, right? But minor things maybe not. And so our Mishnah actually comes to address the minor ones, not the major ones. So says our Mishnah, these people are a puzzle. A misachek bekuvya, person who plays with dice, which we assume means gambling, right?
Gambling.
So kind of gambling. Hamalveh beribit, if you lend money with interest. Mafriche yonim, someone who does bird flights.
Racing.
Well, so mafriche can mean a lot of things, but we'll see. Well, not a lot. It can mean one of two things, and where we'll discuss. But I literally the word mafriche is that you're raising them, right? Like you said, you're growing birds for some purpose, right? And what's next? Sorry, I lost the place. V'socharei shviit, and someone who does business during Shemitah, when of course things are supposed to be hefker, you're not allowed to do it. Let's say someone does business in Shemitah, then they can't be a witness. Amar Rabbi Shimon, b'tchila yukarnotan osvei shviit. They used to call these people gatherers during Shemitah. And then Misharabu Hanasim, when more people came and did this illegally, Chazru Likaran Socharei Shviat. They came to call them merchants in Shemitah. We'll see in the Gemara what that means. None of it makes sense right now. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Now says Rabbi Yehuda about the beginning of the Mishnah, right? When is it true that people who do these things like play dice or stuff are pasul? A matai bisman she'en lehem umnut elahu. If they have no other occupation. But if they have another occupation and they just play poker on the side, right? Assuming that that's what it means, right? Then it's not a problem, then they're kosher. And Rashi explains a little bit, some of the Mepharshim explain Rashi a little bit more, that basically the concern here is that if you never work hard to make a living, you don't have appreciation for the rules. You don't have appreciation for what people need to go through to have, set rules in commerce and judges and borrowing. You just, you came into it as inheritance, or in this case, you're gambling. So you don't really care about the rules. Easy come, easy go, let's say, right? So we need someone who actually has experience with real world in order to judge, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or to be an aid, sorry. Says the Gemara, Misachek bekuvya, my kavod. What's wrong? You're gambling. Everyone's a consenting, willing adult. Why is that a problem? Because although everyone is a consenting, willing adult, it's still called an asmachta, meaning a person says, $1,000 that I'm going to get whatever score, they really think they're going to win. And when they lose, they are forced to pay, but essentially you're stealing from them because they really didn't intend to pay you. They agreed to, they didn't intend to, but the one who wins is essentially stealing from the one who lost. Now, it's not stealing doraita, so that's why it's not included previously, but it's inappropriate, and it's what's called a smachta, and a smachta lo kanya, right? You're not really konet, and so you're essentially, if you're forcing him to pay, you're essentially stealing from him. Rav Sheshet says, no, that's not a smachta. Koki agav n'lav smachta. That's not what a smachta. A smachta is a case, if you recall, we had in Bava Metzia, Rashi quotes, where, in Bava Batra, actually, we had this. He quotes from Bava Metzia. We had it in both, where basically a person says to another, I'll work your field for the summer, right? And I'll give you half the payroll, a regular sharecropper. And the guy says to him, well, what if you don't produce anything, right? Then I lose my field. He says, well, if I don't work and leave the field blank, I'll give you $1 million, or I'll give you $1,000, whatever number. But there, it's an asmachta, because you don't really intend that's going to happen. You think, I'm going to work the field. I don't really mean, if I don't work the field, I'm going to pay you. So therefore, there you don't really mean it. But here, you know that it's subject to chance. And so therefore, here you really do mean it. But this is not an asmachta. Shavuot Tov, Robert. We are six lines from the bottom, 7 lines from the bottom of Chavdal and Mabet. Ella, the reason that a person who gambles is not kosher to be a witness is lefish ein asukim b'yishuvo shel olam, because he's not engaged in normal social norms, right? He's not engaged in regular business. He's engaged in all kinds of illicit black market things, as we would say, and therefore we can't really trust him. Now, my benayo, what's the difference between whether it's because you're stealing or because you're just not osek in yishuv ha'olam? The gamar umnuto achriti. The difference, of course, is if you have another job. Because if you have another job and you just gamble on the side, then you know what the real world is. You have, you drive your truck, you just have fun on the side. But if you're stealing, you're stealing. You can't say I don't steal 9 days of the week, but I steal, or 9/10 of the time, but I steal the rest. And Tanya, or Ditznan, as I guess the gear says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says in our Mishnah, Matai, when is it true that a gambler is puzzle? Bisman she'ein lehem umnut elohu. When you have no other job, al v'yesh lehem umnut shelohu ksherim, then he's kosher. Says the Gemara, well, this Mishnah seems to be pretty clear about the reason, right? It must be that you're not stealing. It must be because you don't have a normal occupation. And if you did, besides this gambling, you'd be kosher. Alma, taima dematnitim mishum yishuvo sha'olam. Who? You see, the reason of our Mishnah is because of commerce, of Nishuv Olam, not because of stealing. So Kashya L'Rami Bar Chama says the Gemara, well, I don't, there's a whole other way to read the Mishnah, which seems a lot more clear, which is that the Tanakama is saying one thing and Rabbi Yehuda is arguing, right? Tanakama is saying a gambler is puzzle. Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says only if he has no other job. In which case, the Tanakama is saying that because he's a robber, he's stealing. So therefore, he's puzzle in every circumstance. Rabbi Yehuda is arguing. Says the Gemara, v'chi tema, if you're going to, Rami Bar Chama is going to try to say that pligi Rabbanan aled Rabbi Yehuda, that in fact the rabbis argue with Rabbi Yehuda and say that a gambler or all the people in the Mishnah are puzzle no matter what other jobs they have. But Rahama Rabbi Yeshua Malevi has famously said, Komakom, Shamar Rabbi Yehuda, turn to the top of Daf Chav Hey and Aleph. Wherever Rabbi Yehuda uses the words in the Mishnah of Matai, when is it true? Or Bameh Dvar Memurim, when are these things said? That's not arguing, that's Eino al Lefarish. He's explaining the Tanakama, Tivrei Chachamim. He's saying, I agree with the Chachamim, and this is what they say. This is what they're limited to. And Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rabbi Shua Malevi and says the word Eimatai is Lefarish, and the word Bameh, B'med Dvar Memurim, is Lachlok. But Kuli Alma, the third line, Eimatai is Lefarishu. Everybody, meaning both Rabbi Shua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan, say that when Rabbi Yehuda says the word Eimatai, he's not arguing with the Tanakama, he's explaining the Tanakama. So how does Rami Bar Chama understand our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, well, Rami Bar Chama could argue with Rabbi Shua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. And he could say that when I read the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is arguing, and I'm going like the Tanakama, which is probably the predominant opinion. Says the Gemara, Gavra Karamid, you're arguing one person can argue on another person, right? Meaning an Amora on another Amora. Mar Savar Pligi. Rami Bar Chama holds that Rabbi Yehuda argues, and Mar Savar Lo Pligi. Okay, so therefore, Rami Bar Chama would read our Mishnah as a machloket between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, and the other opinion in the Gemara would read, which is Rav Sheshet, would read it as one opinion, like the other Amoraim said. It says, is that true though? 5 lines from the top. Below Pligi, is it true that there's not an opinion that argues with the opinion in our Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda? Tanya, but there's a Braita that says, now we're quoting the Tosefta, Bein sheyesh lo umnut shalohu, bein she'ein lo umnut elohu, harei pasul. The Braita clearly says an opinion that's not like Rabbi Yehuda, that says whether that's your only job or it's not your only job, you're pasul. So how do you explain that? Says the Gemara, well, that is Sahi Rabbi Yehuda mishum Rabbi Tarfani. That must be Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda mishum Rabbi Tarfon says in a whole different context by a Nazir. That, remember, I'll tell you the case and then read the Gemara inside. If you recall, the cases where two people are sitting and they see a man walking towards them. And they start arguing, oh, I heard he's a Nazir. Another guy says, oh, I heard he's not a Nazir. So Ruvain says, I'll be a Nazir if that person's a Nazir. And Shimon says, I'll be a Nazir if he's not a Nazir, right? So now, then the guy shows up and either he is or isn't a Nazir. Says Rabbi Tarfon, now I'm reading inside, Lo'olam ein echad mehem nazir. Neither one of them is a nazir. Why? Why don't you say it's either yes or no? Why isn't one of them a nazir? Lefi it's not nizirut el hafla. Nizirut is only given to hafla, meaning that distinction. You have to know at the time you say it whether what you're saying is going to be true. If you don't know, then we say, yeah, you're just talking. People talk all the time. They didn't really mean it. You didn't really mean to become a nazir. And so if that's the case, then whenever people basically gamble, right, whether they think they mean it or not, they don't mean it, right? People never mean something when they say it. So in which case, if you force them to pay when they lose, you're stealing from them. And therefore, according to this opinion, if you gamble and take money from other people, you're always puzzle for Eidut, right? It's the other opinion in the Mishnah that is maybe Mishum Yishuv Olam. Okay, says we're at the 2 dots. The next case in the Mishnah, was malveh beribit, if you lend money with interest. Says Rava, it's not just the lender, it's even a loveh beribit pasul edut. Even if you borrow money, poor guy needs, $1,000 to fix his car, and he goes to the loan shark and gets it, but he has to pay back double. That's also a prohibition. The Torah says not to borrow money with interest. And the fact that this person went and did that means that he's willing to break the law because of his monetary needs, even though we have a lot of sympathy for him, right? He still is pasul edut. Says the Gemara, but our Mishnah didn't say that. Our Mishnah said malveh beribit, the lender malveh. So the Gemara, no, what our Mishnah meant was a milveh haba'a beribit, a loan, not a lender, but a loan that involves interest makes people pasul, both the lender and the borrower, for testimony. Now, it says the Gemara, there was a story with a person named Barbenitos. Barbenitos was a famous banker. Okay, he ran a bank. And Asidu Beitrei Sadi, two witnesses came in to impugn his reputation. One said, Chanamar Kamedi Diosif Biribita. In front of me, I watched him lend money to someone else with interest. So he's a bad guy. And Chanamar, the second one, came in and said, I borrowed money from him and he charged me interest. Lididi Osfi Biribita. So basically, two people are coming in to say that he lends money with interest. So Pasle Rava the Barbenitis. Rava said, okay, this guy's on the blacklist. He can't be a testimony. He can't be a witness because he's a lender of ribit. Says Gemara, that seems strange. Because Rava Huda'amar, Rava just said, we had a few lines earlier, that if you're loveh beribit, you're pasule edut. That if you borrow money with interest, you become pasul. So the second aide came in and said, I borrowed money from Barbenitus with interest. But by saying that, you make yourself a rasha because you borrowed money with interest. And then your testimony shouldn't be believed. So how can we add you to the other witness to pasul Barbenitus? Havile rasha, you become a rasha because you borrowed money with interest. Torah amral tashet rasha aid. Torah says a rasha can't be a witness. Says the Gemara, well, you forgot what we said actually in the daf a couple of weeks ago. Rava l'tamei. This is Rava's consistent opinion. Damar Rava pointed out that Adam karov etzel atzmo. One point is a person can't testify about himself, right? Ve'ein Adam mesim atzmo rasha. You cannot testify to make yourself a rasha because you can't testify about yourself. So if you walk in the door and say, I ate treif, or I was mechalel Shabbat, we don't make you pasul based on that, right? Because you don't have the reliability. You are relative to yourself. So your testimony basically is split. We believe what you said, but we don't believe the part that's about you. So you said, I borrowed money with interest from Barbenitus. So you believe that Barbenitus lends money with interest, but we don't, not that we don't believe, but we don't take seriously the implication for you. We only take seriously the implication for other people. And therefore, your edut is actually believed, and you can testify against Barbenitus. Now, there was a case, we're around halfway down, Ahu Tabcha, there was a butcher. And one day, people realized that this butcher was selling meat that was not kosher under a kosher label. Okay, it happens, unfortunately. It turned out that a treifa came out from under his hand. It's very interesting. The Rishonim discuss this a lot. The Rambam discusses this too, that it doesn't necessarily mean like you come to someone's house and they give you a meal and it turns out afterwards that it was treif, right? It's specifically presumably, well, there's a debate about this, but one opinion is that this is specifically someone who is held up to the public as a certified butcher, right? So there's basically a different standard. He has a hashgacha, and he sells it under the impression, and then he turns out to be lying. Okay, so he's someone who's basically representing it as one thing and then giving out something else. So pasle Rav Nachman v'Avrei. So Rav Nachman pasled him, and he, fired him basically. He couldn't work anymore in the city. So this guy says, I'm going to do tshuva. Azal, and he went Rabbi Mazye v'Turfe. He grew long his hair and his nails, which was, a way of basically showing that you're in penance and you're sorry, you're being mizalzel on yourself, you're not taking yourself, carefully because you feel bad about what you did. So the rabbis looked at him and said, oh, this guy must really feel bad about it. So we should allow him to get his job back. We forgive him. Okay. So Savar Rav Nachman Nachshuri. So Rav Nachman thought to give him back his hashgacha. Amrle Rava said, Rava, how do you know he's authentic? Maybe he's just playing a game because he wants to get his job back, right? Which is pretty reasonable. Dilma iarume kama arim. Maybe he's tricking you, meaning he's acting as if he's sorry because he wants his money, he wants his job. But how do you know he's authentic? It says, well, okay, so how do you prove someone means it? Elamaita kante kidirav idi bar Avin. As Rav Idi bar Avin said, Rav Idi bar Avin hachoshed ala trefot, a person who is choshed on giving out things that are trefa and saying they're kosher. So he's basically willing to lie in order to make more money, right? And normally, if you shecht an animal, it turns out to be a treifa, you got to throw it away, which is a huge loss, right? Huge loss. You feed it to the dogs, but like it's a huge loss. So how do you know that someone is choshed on treifot that he can get his reputation back? So said Ravidi Bar Avin, ein lo takana, he cannot be rehabilitated. He's got to go somewhere where they don't know him, and therefore you can't assume he's doing this to get people to say good things about him because no one knows him here. And yachzer aveda b'davar chashuv. He finds a diamond ring and he returns it. So he basically is willing to lose money that he didn't have to lose. No one knows he found this thing for a mitzvah. So there you see that he is basically willing to lose money to keep the laws, in which case you can now trust him to not sell treifot. Oh, sheyotze treifa mitachad yado b'davar chashuv mishalo. The same idea, that he loses money himself from selling something which is a treifa, and he admits it, right? So he could have kept it secret, but he admitted, oh, this is a treifa, and therefore we show again that he basically is willing to follow the rule, even though he loses money, and now you could trust him again on treifot. Continued the Mishnah, mafriche yonim. So this is interesting, right? We say people, I don't remember how we translate it, mafriche yonim, people who send out birds. So what does that mean?
Pigeon flyers.
Well, right. So we're saying I've been avoiding saying that because it's not, because there's a machloket in the Gemara now. So what are mafriche yonim? Asked the Gemara. But literally, but pricha means flying, right? We know that, right? So what does that mean? People who fly with pigeons. So hacha tergimu here, remember here always means in Bavel, where they wrote the Gemara. Here we explained it to mean where a person races pigeons. You say itakteme yonach lion. If my pigeon gets ahead of your pigeon, right? Now the Gemara is going to ask in a second. That seems very much like dice, right? It's like gambling. But that's one explanation. And Rabbi Chama bar Oshaya said it means ara. Ara is very interesting. Ara, it's not so clear what ara means exactly. Rashi has a French word, of course, which doesn't help me very much. Ashtuyun, right?
Ashtuyun?
That's the word in Ra, if you see it there. So what it means, though, Rashi then explains in Hebrew, right, is that it basically you teach your pigeon to go and gather other pigeons. So basically, you train your pigeon to go out to sort of the open and train other birds to come with it. So you're essentially stealing. Well, we'll see in a second whether you're stealing or not. So it says the Gemara, Manda Amar the first opinion that you're talking about racing pigeons. My time Amar Ara. Why didn't you say someone who trains their pigeon to go get other pigeons? He would say to you, because that's not really stealing, right? Because pigeons are hefker, they run away, they fly away. It's not like you went into someone's house and you stole their bird, right? The only reason we don't allow you to do that is mipnei darkei shalom ba'alma. It's because people set up a dovecote, I guess, or set up a nest, not a nest, a birdhouse in the middle of the field, and the pigeons that fly into that birdhouse they think are theirs, even though the pigeons can fly out at any time, right? So since they can fly out, it's not really stealing, but it's certainly inappropriate to go train your pigeon to go steal those other pigeons. But that doesn't passel you for witness, for testimony. But Manda Amar Ara, the one who said it's that thing, it's a pigeon stealer, basically. My time why didn't he say it means that you race pigeons? Because he would say to you, that's the case of gambling. We already had that case in the Mishnah, right? So I agree that if you race your pigeons and you take money from other people, you should be puzzled. But it's the same as gambling. So v'idach, okay, how does the other Amora answer that? So the Amora would explain that there's two different cases of gambling in our Mishnah. That one is a gambling where you basically control what happens, meaning you're playing a game that's just you. It's a game of chance, but it's just you're making decisions, like say poker. And the other is where you're relying on a bird. Now, birds are a little fickle, right? You might train your bird, but you never know, of course, if your bird is actually going to do what you want it to do. So let's read inside. Tana tole bedat atzmo. The Tana is told on your own decision of how to play and what to do. The Tana tola bedat yono, and they do it in where it's dependent on your bird. V'tzricha, you need to have both halachot. The Tana tola bedat atzmo. If you had only taught me that a person who gambles with his own initiative is pasul, I would have thought hatam hu gamar makni. Right there, a person doesn't really think that they're going to give over the money that they gambled to Amar because they say to themselves, turn the page now to Chafhei Amud Bet. They say to themselves, well, I'm really good at playing this game. I really know who's going to win. Kimli benafshe diadanatfei. I have confidence that I'm never going to lose, right? Everyone who plays a card game, I have a good feeling. I can read the hand, whatever the game might be. I really think I'm going to win, right? And when I lose, when you take money from me, it's almost like stealing from me, or it is stealing from me. So, but avotole bedatio no. But if I'm relying on my pigeon, everybody knows, I don't know, the pigeon might do it, they might not do it, and therefore it's not as confident that I'm going to do it, and therefore if I lose, I'm willing to lose, right? Aim low if you race your pigeon. So you might think there it's not an asmachta because there I know there's a good chance I'm going to lose. But v'tana tola b'dat no, and if you only taught about gambling with your pigeons, I would say no. Pigeons, you never lose a horse race, right? Because they used to have these methods of something called naksha, which means banging things together, right? Where basically you would have some kind of pattern where you would control your pigeon by, training it. You hear the sound, you go this way, you hear that sound, you go that way. So you could say benaksha talia milta. It's based on your banging in order to get the pigeon to do what you wanted to do. I've got a really good system to communicate with my pigeon, right? But if I'm playing cards or I'm playing a game, I know there's chance there. So maybe aim low there, you don't believe that you're going to win. Therefore, you need both cases. So therefore, our Mishnah may be telling you two cases of gambling, one with birds and one on your own, and that would be okay. There's another opinion, of course, that the pigeons case is not referring to gambling and racing pigeons. It's referring to training a pigeon to go and basically steal, essentially, somebody else's pigeon. Now, says we're Meitve. We got a question about that from the following Breita. The Tosefta elaborates on our Mishnah. And the Tosefta says the following. Hamisachik bekubya, right? The case in our Mishnah is someone who plays with dice. This is referring to people who play with pispiseiim, which literally means, I don't really know what it means, to be honest with you, but it's some kind of device like dice, I guess, that we would
Wooden
use.
cubes. That's how
Cubes, right? Well, that's what a die is, right? A cube. But basically the things that are set aside for gambling. But says the Breita, it doesn't have to just be poker chips. Lo pispiseiim bavad amru. Even if you find, little shells from nuts, right? Agozim, or from pomegranates. I don't know what kind of shells you have in pomegranates, but pomegranate shells, right? I guess that means the kernels, right? The klipe rimonim. I don't think it means the outside, but anyways, you basically are. It's making, even if it's an ad hoc thing, that's also puzzles you. Now, ematai chazaratan. Let's say you're a gambler and you decide you want to leave behind that lifestyle. How do you prove that you've left it behind? Well, you got to break all your device, right? Get rid of mishi shabruet pispisayim. You got to break up your dice. You got to throw out all the cards. V'yachzru ben chazara gumuran. You have to do such a full tshuva that afilu b'chinam lo avdi. You won't even play for no money, right? Because you're just staying so far away from playing. Remember, it's only prohibited if there's money because you're stealing from someone. But even bechinam here, you wouldn't even play. So that's the first case. Says the Breita, the next case is malve beribit. You lend money with interest. Says the Breita, echad hamalve ve'echad halova. Whether you lend it, you borrow it, like Rava said before, you're apostle from testimony because you've been over a mitzvah in order to gain money. How do you do tshuva? You got to rip up all the documents. And you have to show that you really are so distant from giving lending with interest that you won't even lend to a non-Jew, which is permitted, that you won't even do that because you want to stay so far away from this illicit behavior. And the third case in the Mishnah was mafrichei yonim, someone who, as we say, flies these pigeons.
Just one thing.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like the loan document, it's like a little bit confusing because we also rip up the loan document when the loan is paid.
Right. Well, no, I think in this case, obviously ripping up means if you're the lender. Right? If you're the borrower, you don't have the loan document. The lender is the one who keeps it to prove that the guy owes him, but you're basically have to say, I made a mistake lending you with ribit. I give up. I'm going to forgive you, basically.
Okay.
Right. But yeah, for the borrower, it doesn't do anything, right? The borrower gets out scot-free. That's not. The next case was mafrichei yonim. So it says the Breita elushim marinet yonim. These are someone who they race the pigeons, or marin, again, it's not clear what it means yet. They makes them go. Says the Breita v'lo yonim bilvad amru. It's not only birds and not only doves or pigeons. Ela afilu behema chaya ve'of. Now we're going to ask about this in a second. right? Because if it means racing, then obviously you can race animals. We do it all the not I don't do it, but people do it all the time, right? But you can't really, how do you train a cow to go get other cows to come back with it, right? That seems pretty far-fetched. Cows are behemoth, are domestic animals. They're not out in the open like birds and even a chaya. How do you get a behemoth to follow your animal and come back with it? So we'll ask that in a second. But says the Braita, "Ematei chazaratan." How do you do tshuva for this? Well, you got to break your devices. Mishi shabruat pigmehem. Pigmehem are the things that they would use to get the animals to go, like make noises or signs. And you could do total tshuva, that even if you were in the desert, you wouldn't do it. Meaning, this is Rashi says is only according to, you could take out as part of the Braita if you don't agree with that explanation. But if you say that you're basically training your birds to go get other birds in the desert where everything is hefker, that's totally permitted. Right? You could send your dog out in the desert to get other dogs, they're hefker. But you don't do it because you're showing that you're so far away from doing this thing. And then the fourth case of the Braita was of our Mishnah, and the Braita was Socharei Shvi'it, someone who does business in Shemitah. Elo shenosim v'notim beperot Shvi'it. This is someone who does business. They sell fruit in Shemitah, which is totally prohibited. Matei chazaratan. When is their chazara? When is their tshuva? Mishetegia Shvi'it acheret v'yibadlu. Well, it's really hard to do tshuva because you can't prove that you're not going to do it until 7 years later when the next Shemitah comes and you show that you're not profiting from perot Shemitah. Rabbi Nechemia, says Rabbi Nechemia at the end of the Braita, lo chazarat dvarim bilvad amru. Just to be clear, if you sell money in Shemitah, you can't just say, I'm sorry, I'm never going to do it again. Ela chazarat mamon, you've got to return the money. Now, how do you return the money? Right, you did business. Ketzad. So, Omer, what you should do is you say, Ani ploni ben ploni. It's like saying vidui, right? I so-and-so. Kinasti matayim zuz be'erot shviyat. I made $200, 200 zuz, by selling things in Shemitah, and I'm giving them back. I'm going to give them to the poor. It's presumably because you can't find all the people you gave it to, right? But I'm going to give it to the poor as a gift, basically to absolve myself of that profit that I made. So that is the Braita. Now, the reason we quoted this Braita in this right now is because we think it sheds light on how to explain Mafrichei Yonim. Because Katani Miha, the Braita said, Behima, that this can apply also to a domestic animal. So, if the one according to the opinion that it's a racing of the animals, so obviously you can race your cows, right? They don't run very fast, but they can race. So I can see you have a behima that you're racing and trying to make money, and that's why it's a problem. Elamand Amar Ara, according to one who said that if you're training your pigeon to go get other pigeons, how can this happen by a domestic animal? How do you get you can't train your sheep to go to someone else's yard and get their sheep. Behima batachi. Says there, yes, in fact, you can think of a case where something called a shor habar. Remember, shor habar, which I don't really know how to translate it, but it literally means a shor of the wild, right? Is a domestic animal, but in many ways, it's also a wild animal. Remember, there's a machlok about whether shor habar is a domestic animal or it's a chaya. It's a wild animal, which has a big difference, right? Remember in the Torah, if you slaughter a chaya, you have to cover the blood, kisoy adam, not with the behema. You're allowed to eat certain fats, not with the behema. So how do you know, is this an animal wild or domestic? There's a machloket tanaim. Shor habar, says the Mishnah in Klaim, is min behemahu. It's an animal, it's a domestic animal. And Rav Yossi says it's a min chaya. So no, we're going according to Tanakama. So according to the Tanakama that says it's an animal, it explains how you can have an animal that's a wild animal that Rashi explains. They would train their animals to go out, and there would be other shor habars, which are domestic, but they're also wild. So they're domestic. I guess they come back home at night or something, but they're wild and free. And you train your cow to go and be a Pied Piper and lead the other cows back, and that is essentially stealing, and therefore you are puzzle for testimony. Now, says the Gemara, we are at the sixth to last narrow line. The Hosif Tana, there's a Braita that says, Hosifu Alehem, they added on not just the cases in our Mishnah, but two more cases. Gazlanim, people who steal, and Chamsanim. Chamsan is, I don't know how you translate it in English, but it's where you pressure somebody to sell you something. So you pay them, but you go over and say, I want that thing, I'm going to take it from you, here's $10, or what you give them fair value, but you don't give them a choice, right? That's called chamas, where you pay, but you force people. Chamsan. Thank you. Now, says Gemara, why do you have to add on gazlan? It's doraiti. Or if you steal from someone, then you're puzzled doraita. No, we're talking about a not real geneva. It's where you steal from a baby. You have a miner or a shota or a cheresh who find a diamond ring on the ground, right? Now, a cheresh shota v'katan can't own something officially, so it's hefker basically. So you go and you steal it from them, right? Now that's not exactly so. Mitchila meikar suffer in the beginning they thought, well, that's not a nice thing, but it's very rare. Inami, or else maybe B'nai Darkei Shalom Ba'alma. The reason we discourage that is because, you shouldn't go stealing candy from a baby, but it's not really Geneva. The Kivan de Chazor de Sof Sof Mimonaho, since they saw that Mimonaho de Kashakli, in fact, you are taking money from somebody else, what that shows us is that you really love money, right? And we really get suspect that you're going to do things like say false testimony or be a false judge because someone paid you off or because you think there's something in it for you, and paslin rabbanan, therefore the rabbanan made you pasul. So that is what we mean by gezela. Obviously not real gezela, which would of course pasul you. And then we said chamsanim, those who pressure other people to give them things. So what happened there, right? So Meikara Savar, originally they thought, well, sure, it's not a nice thing, but at least you're paying. Demei kayahiv, right? You're giving money, and akroi ba'amu. Now, some take out these words because they don't add very much, but what it would mean would be that, it happens very rarely, right? So meaning you're not like going around town taking whatever you want and just dropping money like some really inappropriate person. You found one thing, you got this love of this person's cup of coffee, and you had to give him $5 and take his coffee. But you're not someone who's going to do that regularly. But kivan de chazud de chatfi, when they realized that, people were really snatching items, they were grabbing things from other people with some regularity, then they said, wait, this is really a problem. We've got to be gazru be'rabanan, that if someone does that, they really lose all trustworthiness and they can't be an aid. Now, Tana, there's another Braita, the second wide line. Od Hosifu Aleim, they added 3 more categories. Roim, shepherds, right? As we've learned in Sefer Breshit, of course, we always have a concern that a shepherd's going to take their animal and graze in grass that's not theirs, right? And take someone else's property. So all shepherds are suspect that they steal, right? A shepherd, where am I? Third line. Gabaim are people who are appointed by the government to collect taxes. Right, so the government says you can take $1,000 per person, right? But we always worry they're going to take a little extra. And mochasim are people who basically have fixed taxes, like tax collectors at the roads, like the George Washington Bridge, right? So you collect money, and of course, they always take a little bit extra. It says where roim, shepherds make har savri. Originally, they thought akroi ba'amu. This is where the words akroi ba'amu fit in, right? That it just happens once in a while. You have a bunch of sheep. You try to graze them in public lands, but sometimes they go and they walk on the neighbor's field and they eat inappropriately. But then they caught on that shepherds do this on purpose, right? Kivan dechazur dekamechavni, that the shepherds were intentionally steering their animals to somebody else's field. V'shadu l'chatchila, and they were doing it originally gazu berabanan, that they should be puzzled for testimony. And the next cases were gabaim and mochasim, because meikar safar, they originally thought, look, these guys are just tax collectors. My dekitzlahu kashakli. They're taking what they're allowed to take, right? They get a certain amount. The government says you have to take $10,000 from each person, or $500, and that's what they're collecting. But even the chazur de kashakli yitera, once they realize that there's, they're greasing the wheels, they're taking a little extra, then paslinu, the Rabbanan said they are pasul for testimony. Says Rava, something very interesting. Says Rava, you might think that the only problem with shepherds are small animals because they go everywhere, right? Behema daka. But says Rava, I disagree. Ro'eh sha'amru, when they said a ro'eh is suspect for witness, for testimony, echad ro'eh behema daka, ve'echad ro'eh behema gasa. Whether it's a small animal or a big animal, we worry about all shepherds that they really are not keeping their crops, their flocks in their own fields, and they're letting them walk and eat other people's food. Says Miyama Rava Hachi. Did Rava really say that? Rava said, is quoted elsewhere as saying that if you're a ro'eh behema daka, if you're a shepherd, we think that's what it means. We're going to see in a minute it's not what it means. But if you're a shepherd of a small animal, then be'eretz Yisrael psulin. In Israel, where the standards are higher, you are pasul. B'chutz la'aretz ksherim. But if you're in chutz la'aretz, you're kosher. Ro'eh behema gasa. But if you are ro'eh of a big animal, then afilu be'eretz Yisrael ksherim. Then even in Eretz Yisrael, you would be kosher, because we don't assume that big animals get out and eat in other people's fields. So it contradicts what Rava just said, that every kind of shepherd is pasul. Says the Gemara, well, that's referring not to shepherds. That's referring to someone who raises animals. Raises animals, hahu b'migadlim itmar. It's where you raise animals, meaning you're raising animals in your house, like basically stables, right? And you are not letting them out, so therefore you're not stealing from anybody. However, if they're small animals, they escape, right? They get out at night, they go under the fence, they come back. And so in Eretz Yisrael, they were gozer even with small animals. But outside of Eretz Yisrael, and if big animals, you don't have to worry that that person's stealing. And says Gemara, that makes a lot of sense. That Bright is referring to Hachanami Mistavra, Niditani, because the pasuk, the Gemara we had yesterday, actually, if a person says, the Mishnah, the Braita said, Nemanim alai shloshero e bakar. All right, remember we're talking about who's a good judge, who's not a good judge. Let's say a person comes in and says, I would trust 3 shepherds of cattle to be people. So my love, the edut, it implies that they are saying a testimony, and therefore what you see from here is that even if you're a shepherd for large animals, you're puzzle for a testimony, which is what Rava said. This more, no, that's not what you were saying yesterday. You were saying, I trust people lidina. I trust people to be judges for me, right? Which is a whole different standard. Remember, a witness doesn't have to know anything. They just have to be trustworthy, right? A judge has to have knowledge, right? And generally, of course, shepherds don't have knowledge, right? So Dekanami, it must be that we're talking here about judges. Diktani shloshe roe bakar. We said 3. What do you don't need 3 if you're talking about witnesses, right? You need 2 for witnesses. Vila edut shloshe lamali. Okay, Elamai, we're 5 lines from the bottom. Ladina. We're talking about where you said, I trust 3 people who raise cattle as my judges, right? So the point, of course, is that they don't know the halacha. They didn't go to law school, right? They're not real judges. Says Gemara, well, if that's the point, my area shloshero e bakar. Why'd you say 3 shepherds? Say any 3 people who don't know the halacha. Say kol beit tlata delo gemiridina nami. Why would you say, right? If you're talking about witnesses who might be puzzled because they steal, I hear why you're talking about shepherds, because you're saying shepherds steal, and therefore I'm accepting them on me, even though they do that. But if you're saying that I accept people who are ignorant of the halacha, the din, say any 3 people who are ignorant of the din. Why are you saying 3 shepherds specifically? Says the Gemara, well, no, haki kamar. What you're saying is even 3 shepherds. Afilo hani lo shchichi b'yishuv. They don't know anything, right? They don't know the rules. They live out in the fields. They are totally disconnected from society. Even them, if I accept them as my judges, they're my judges. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, new halacha, stamro epasul. If you don't know better and you just meet a guy and he's a shepherd, you assume that he is pasul. Okay? But stam gabai kasher. Stam person who collects money, you give him the benefit of the doubt and you assume that he's doing the right thing. If you find out that he's not, of course, then he would be pasul. But stam gabai is kasher. Now, we're going to have a story, one last story for tonight, about a gabbai tzedakah. Avuad Rabbi Zera, well, not necessarily gabbai tzedakah, a gabbai for the government, actually. A gabbai who collects money for the government says, you're in charge. Remember, they would sell this privilege, right? You collect and everyone, and you get maybe 10% or whatever it might be. So there was a guy who was the father of Rabbi Zera, Avuad Rabbi Zera. Avid Gavuta Tleisar Shnim. 13 years in a row, he collected the taxes in his town. Kiavi ati reish nara lamata. Now, when the head of the nara, nara means like the the river. Well, it means literally a river, but it means a river was the regions, right? So their regions were not based on states; they were based on flow from a river. So when the head of that sector would come to the town, right? The point of Rabbi Zera, we'll see Rabbi Zera's point here, is that he wants to minimize the population, right? Because if there's a lot of people, then you got to pay a lot of taxes. If there aren't so many people, you pay fewer taxes. So Kiavi Chazi Rabbanan, when he saw the Rabbanan, meaning when he saw them in the streets, Amarlu, he would say to them a pasuk from the pasuk's from Yeshayo, Lech ami bo b'chadarecha, go my people into your hiding places, because they understood the pasuk, and they meant, chadar means your room, and they would hide. And Kiavichazi Insha Damata, when he saw the regular people who might not understand the pasuk, and he didn't want to say to them, go hide, because if word gets back, of course, we'll get in a lot of trouble. He would say, Amari would say, oh, Reish Nahara Atalamata, the head of the river authority is coming to the town. Ha'idna, this is the time, you got to be careful, right? that Nachis Abba from brother from Abba, father is going to take excuse me, he's gonna get rid of the father in order for the son, and the son for the father, meaning he's gonna make everyone pay up for everybody else, and everyone would get the message. And just the top of Daf Chavav, umiganzu kuliyam, everyone go and hide, right? So Kiati, and so now when the tax collector showed up, Amarle, so Rabbi Zerah's father would say to him, Miman Nivai, who are you going to collect from, right? How could you ask for a big price? There's only 10 people living here or something. So obviously they'd have to make it believable, but this was a trick that he would do to reduce the amount that they would have to pay. Kinicha nafshe, let's finish the story. When this Avud de Rabbi Zera died, Amarlo, he said to the people around him, Tleisar ma'ed tzarili b'sidni. I have 13 ma'ah that are tied up in my sudar, which sidin usually means like my sheet or my container. Ahadjule, the plan to give them back to Joe. The shakilti minei v'lotzrichle, I took them from him, but I don't have to pay into them, meaning maybe it was an advance payment, my job's over. So he was very, very honest. So this is obviously a good tax collector. And as we said before, tax collectors are assumed to be okay, unless you hear that they're not, but shepherds get a bad reputation to begin with. And we will stop there and continue tomorrow. And I don't know when we're learning tomorrow. So
I'm open to anything.
Robert,
Robert,
okay?
what's good for you?
For me personally, the morning is better.
Okay,
Okay.
7:45 a.m.
Okay.
We have a really exciting Gemara tomorrow as usual. So I'll hopefully see you all tomorrow morning bright and early.
I might be a few minutes late because here in Lakewood we daven at 7.
Okay, I can't change that. So we'll see you when you make it. Shavua Tov, tomorrow morning, 7:45.
Shavua Tov. Thank you. Enjoy the dinner.
Thank you. Good night.
And enjoy the dinner, whatever dinner it is.
I'm going to the SAR dinner, which is a first for me. So we'll have fun. Okay, have a good night, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.